Hello, listeners. Today is January 30th, and this is A Garden a Day with Maidenbrock Gardens. Today, we are visiting a garden, or should I say another garden, that got its start in the 1930s. So far, if I remember correctly, we've visited 3 other gardens that began during the Great Depression: Key West Tropical Forest in Florida, Desert Botanical Garden in Arizona, and Bellingrath Gardens and Home in Alabama. Have I forgotten any? I'm not sure. It seems like these gardens are quite old, but they aren't even 100 years old yet. They're just spring chickens, really. Today's garden began in 1932 and was named after Oklahoma's favorite son, Will Rogers. So where are we? We are in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, at Will Rogers Gardens. The garden was originally named Northwest Park because it was located in the northwest corner of a larger property owned by Oklahoma City. The city purchased 160 acres of a former dairy farm in 1912 to establish a city park. This was only 5 years after Oklahoma became a state in 1907. Isn't that wild? I forget that the United States isn't really that old. The garden was renamed Will Rogers Garden in 1936 in memory of Oklahoma native Will Rogers, who died in a plane crash in 1935 at the age of 55. Will Rogers was a vaudeville performer and actor. During his career, he was the highest paid Hollywood actor and made 71 films, but he was probably most well known as a humorist. He wrote more than 4,000 nationally syndicated newspaper columns. He was known for his folksy style and easygoing personality. Oklahoma's favorite son was a member of the Cherokee Nation. He quipped that his ancestors didn't come over on the Mayflower, but they met the boat. His mother was a member of the Paint Clan. Her family had been expelled from Georgia in what was to be called the Trail of Tears. His father was an attorney and Cherokee judge and served as a delegate to the Oklahoma Constitutional Convention. Rogers County, Oklahoma was named after him. Did you learn about Will Rogers when you were in school? We learned about him when I was in the 4th grade back in the 80s, but I'm not sure he's part of any lesson plans anymore. I'm curious to know. Send me a message or leave a comment on this episode. I'd really like to know. The garden began in 1932 when horticulturalist Henry Walters began developing 30 acres of the larger property into a garden. He received help from the Federal Works Projects Administration and the Civilian Conservation Corps. Together, they cleared trees and brush, built terraces, and dammed 2 small tributaries of the North Fork River to create 2 small lakes. They built several structures on the property out of native sandstone, including picnic shelters, footbridges, walls, terraces, and an amphitheater. Today, the garden includes 15 acres of specialty gardens as well as a few surprises. Visitors will enjoy seeing the Shepherd Garden, planted in 1964 and dedicated to the charter members of the Garden Flower Club. The Living Legacy Garden was planted as part of the city's celebration of our nation's bicentennial in 1976. And the Xeriscape Garden, planted in 1991, demonstrates plants that thrive on the Oklahoma rainfall and with water-wise planting techniques such as mulching and soil improvement. Several other specialty gardens focus on herbs, peonies, daylilies, and iris. In 1938, the Oklahoma Rose Society planted nearly 3,000 rose bushes on 2 acres. In 1986, the garden was named the Charles E. Sparks Rose Garden in honor of the park's superintendent who worked in the garden. The garden served as a test garden until a serious rose blight hit the garden and the park's horticulturalists decided to redesign the garden as a color garden, containing annuals and perennials suited to the Oklahoma climate. The color garden bursts with colors that change with the seasons. Today, the garden is called the Charles E. Sparks Memorial Color Garden. 10 acres of the garden are devoted to the Margaret Annis Boys Arboretum. The Arboretum includes hundreds of trees, many native to Oklahoma, as well as trees rarely seen in the state. The oldest trees were planted in the 1930s by Henry Walters. The Arboretum includes ADA-accessible trails, and when you wander through this arboretum and garden, you might see a few surprises if you look closely enough. Fallen tree trunks and old stumps haven't been left entirely to nature. No, there was a real estate boom in this garden. Look carefully and you just might see a welcome mat or two, maybe a tiny door or little windows. Watch where you step. Tiny gnome houses have popped up in this garden. Larger humans will enjoy the Ed Lichen Conservatory. The conservatory is a Victorian-style building set on a sandstone rock foundation. The conservatory was named for Ed Lichen, the park department's first employee. He worked for the garden from 1912 to 1954. The conservatory was built in 1924 at nearby Douglas Park and moved to Will Rogers Gardens in 1936. Once used for flower shows and exhibitions, the conservatory today is home to a permanent collection of cacti and succulents. The greenhouses at the garden grow nearly 80,000 plants every year that are then planted in the city's parks and public spaces. Since 1938, Will Rogers Gardens has been the home of the Oklahoma City Council of Garden Clubs. The organization was founded in 1921 to promote horticulture, flower gardening, and conservation. Their office is located in the Garden Exhibition Building. Classes are also held in the building. Classes include everything from flower arranging to garden maintenance. The garden is also part of the Master Gardener program of the Oklahoma State University County Extension Center. Classes for children are offered during spring break and summer, including summer camp. The garden is available for rent for special occasions and is a popular spot for weddings. The popular Festival in the Park is held on the last Saturday in May. The garden is part of the larger Will Rogers Park, which includes an aquatic center, tennis courts, disc golf course, and a senior adult recreation center. The garden is open to the public with free admission, and it's nice to know this garden is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Well, that's about it for today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Join me tomorrow to see where we're going next. If you like A Garden a Day, please consider liking, following, or subscribing to the podcast, and tell your friends. And if you are able, please consider giving the show a 5-star review. It really does help the show, and I appreciate it very much. If all goes well, I'll be right back here tomorrow. See you then.